I'm Bob Darrell. I'm an alcoholic. Glad to be here. I come from the Connect the Dots group in the hitting bottom capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. And it's if you really are trying to forget yourself and help other drunks, it's a target-rich environment. And I love living there. And that is my home group. And if you ever come to that group, the people of that group know that it's my home group by my actions because I have jobs there and commitments. And the home group is the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it takes a certain level of unselfishness for very selfish people to have commitments and to make them. And that was hard for me because I came here like most of us. Pretty selfish guy. I have a sponsor, and he knows he's my sponsor, which is a good idea. If your sponsor's not sure they're your sponsor, they're probably not. You're just sponsoring yourself, but you want the bragging rights of having a sponsor. I understand that. Believe me. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. And yeah, I get that. You know the best way to be sponsorable? Sponsor yourself for a few years. Yeah, that'll do it. And I have a sobriety date. And it's a date from which, to this date, I've had no alcohol, no drugs, no mind or emotion altering medications. And that's October 31st, 1978. And that's almost impossible for a guy like me because I'm the guy who, even in jail, when I was locked up, I couldn't stay. I would always find a way. I'm the guy who can't live without it because I got a big secret. The big secret is without something, I'm nothing. And I can't endure abstinence for a long period of time because of this horrible emptiness and fear and anxiety and these depressive, lonely feelings of not fitting anywhere that always seem to eat my lunch in a state of abstinence. And I'm that guy. I'm not a guy whose problem is alcohol and drugs or any of that other stuff. I'm a guy whose problem is alcoholism. And little did I know it was a sickness that chases you up into your abstinence like a pack of rabid dogs. Why do you think guys who know, beyond, like myself, who know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the worst thing I could do, the most insane thing I could ever do would be to pick up a drink again. And knowing that and tearfully swearing to myself I'd never touch it again. Why the hell am I back at it again in 8 months, 10 months, 6 months, 6 weeks? Sometimes it was the day I got out of detox. I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1971. I wasn't even old enough to take a legal drink. And I didn't want to believe I was an alcoholic. Chapter 3 hits it pretty good for me. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. I don't want to be an alcoholic. But I was. And people who argue with the truth get sick. And all the years that I tried not to be an alcoholic, I got sicker and sicker. And I was good with being a drug addict because that's kind of sexy and cool. And I had hero rock stars that were professed drug addicts. I'm good with that. But I never looked up to anybody who wet their pants on a regular basis. I don't want to be an alcoholic. I'll be a mental health case rather than an alcoholic, because if you're a mental health case, you get pills and sympathy. I like both of those. Good with that. But I don't want to be an alcoholic. I had family members that were alcoholic. I do not want to be an alcoholic. But I am. And I was an alcoholic before I ever picked up a drink. But you don't know that until you activate the allergic reaction to alcohol. Because there's a lot of people that are neurotic. There's a lot of people that have feelings that they don't fit, that are depressive, that are full of anxiety to the point of panic. There's a whole world full of people with all kinds of mental illnesses. The difference between me and them is alcohol solves that stuff. And alcohol does something for me that it only does for the alcoholic. And what that does, and I didn't understand this till I was 5 years sober. what alcohol really did for me was it relieved me of the bondage of self. In the back of the book, there was a doctor who was asked by the American Medical Association to examine us, look at us, go to a few of our meetings, look at our literature, and then make a report to the AMA of what he thought we were, because we were on the radar. I mean, we were up for the Lasker Award. We just had the Saturday Evening Post article was done a few years before that on us, and we were the National Council with Marty Mann and Jelinek and a lot of those people had come together. We were big news. And so the AMA said to this Dr. Baer, just go there, see what you think they are. And I'll tell you something, he walked away as a non-alcoholic with just going to a few meetings and looking at our literature. He defined us, I think, more accurately than I've ever seen anywhere. And one of the things, it's his definition of us, or what he heard, his description of us is repeated, part of it, in the back of the big book in a little obscure section, one of the appendixes, called The Medical View of Alcoholism. And the doctor said that he thought that we're not a temperance movement, and we're not. We're not fighting alcohol. We're good with people drinking. We're just not good with us drinking. My sister drinks. It's a blessing for her. She doesn't drink right. I mean, have you ever been out with somebody who's not an alcoholic and watch them drink? Yeah, they forget where their drink is. You have to remind them. Take a half hour to drink one drink. And we're not a temperance movement, truly, and we're not crusaders, even though there's a phase some of us go through. Most of us come out the other side of that. And what Dr. Baer says, he says we are people who finally knew that we must not drink. And some of us die by every form of self-deception and experimentation, changing substances, doing everything we think we can do to control and enjoy our drinking, to maintain this thing. And we almost die because we don't want to admit that we must not drink. We'll switch to something else for a while. Dr. Bob did that. He did high-powered sedatives every day of his life for 17 years. It bought him large periods of abstinence. But he's an alcoholic. And he's an alcoholic because when he drank alcohol not only did for him what it had done in his early days, or my early days, and that was to set me free, but it also did something to him, and it always did it to him, and it always did it to me. When I would drink alcohol and the effect of the alcohol would hit me and I'd start to get that feeling, it's like there's some kind of a switch inside me, and when it gets thrown, it's the more switch. And one drink alcohol, I get that feeling, throws the more switch, and I can't shut that more switch off. I've always had that allergic reaction, that phenomenon of craving, always. My whole drinking career was it, and yet I didn't know it because of the way it uses my own mind against me. I didn't see a phenomenon of craving, but every single time I drank, I never once, after drinking for an hour, got to a place where a buddy of mine said, "Hey, Bob, can I buy you another one?" I never had the experience of looking at him and thinking to myself, "No, I'm good, thanks, I'm good." I can't get good. And if you can't get good and you can't get enough, you're condemned to have too much. And I had my little soirees into drug addiction and various things like that. But that's part and parcel. That's a little minor nothing aspect of alcoholism. I'm not a drug addict. I really saw the difference. When I was 17 years sober, I was doing fairly well financially. And I took my sister and her husband over to Maui, rented a house on the beach. We had, my brother-in-law rented a Harley. I had a friend over there that gave me his Harley. It was a beautiful dresser. And we were touring around the island, had a great time. I get obsessed with showing my brother-in-law and my sister the top of Haleakala Crater. Well, it's raining, so we're trying to go up there. So I went and got garbage bags. Says, I'm obsessed. I'm telling them, listen, we're going to break through the rain and we'll get above the clouds and it's going to be beautiful. Well, we broke through nothing. It was miserable up there. It was the most miserable ride. Cold rain. And I'm coming down that mountain like a wet rat coming down that mountain. Went around a hairpin turn and wiped out. And I wiped out bad. I went down in a bed of lava rock. I thought I'd broke my back. I'd never experienced pain like that. And what it ended up being, I had 7 broken ribs and a broken collarbone, and I had a lava rock embedded all through me. And they finally got me to the hospital. They got the lava rock out of me with brushes, which was a painful deal. And they wouldn't give me any pain medicine, and I didn't want any because I'm a recovered alcoholic. Finally, after the CAT scan, the doc came in. I was on the PICC line because they thought I was in shock. And he came in and he said to me, well, we can give you some morphine. I said, Doc, you can't give me morphine. He said, no, we're going to give you some morphine. I said, listen, I'm a 17 years sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had been addicted to heroin for a period of time as a kid. You can't give me that. He said, listen, kid, this is non-negotiable. You have dynamic tension between your broken ribs and your collarbone. We must dumb down that pain or you're not going to get better. And they stuck that syringe in that PICC line, hit that morphine, and a funny thing happened. It went to the pain. I didn't have to go rob nobody's TV set or nothing. It was a funny deal. And I was on the pain medicine, as a lot of members of Alcoholics Anonymous are forced to by surgeries and different things, for a period of time. I kept it under control. I was talked with my sponsor about it daily, prayed about it, did all this stuff. Got out the backside, didn't go on a run, and it was fine. But let me tell you something. If that doctor would have come in that emergency room and said, hey, kid, this is non-negotiable. We're going to give you 4 shots of 100 proof vodka every 4 hours, I'd have been dead. I'd have been the guy running down the street with the robe flapping in the background to get to a liquor store, because alcohol is not my drug of choice. It's my drug of no choice. Because I have a level of powerlessness, and you don't know that. That's why I recommend, I go to a couple of treatment centers that specialize in opioid addiction. So I recommend to these guys, I said, listen, you got nothing to lose here. Why don't you take the self-diagnosis test in the book? Page 31. Try it. You're going to find out something useful. First of all, and if you don't find out if you're an alcoholic, you're never going to put all your chips in the pot here. You're always going to tell yourself your case is different. You're always going to be a special kind of alcoholic, and you're never going to get all the way in here. As it says in chapter 5, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely get, and you'll never do that because your case is different. So take the test. The test is easy. Go over to the nearest bar room. I know you don't think you're an alcoholic. You think your problem's crack. You think your problem's heroin. Maybe you're right. Let's find out. Go over to the nearest bar room. Go over there every night for a week. Have 2 strong drinks. Since you can only have 2, you might as well have doubles. 2 doubles, and then shut her down and go home. And you can't smoke nothing, take nothing else, drink nothing. No, can't switch to beer, nothing. 2 drinks, that's it. And the book says it might be worth a bad case of the jitters to find out that, because you know what you might find out? You might find out that your problem came in a substance. My problem comes in people. It's a different animal. And I have alcoholism. And it's a good test. But it's a funny test, because if you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic and you went to take the test, here's what I think would happen to me. I think I'd go in there with the intention I'm going to have 2 doubles and then I'm going to go home. And then as I'm sipping the second drink, I would become very aware that this is not a good test day. Because Jules just came in and I got to have it. She's hot. I got to have a drink with her. Troy's in here. He always has something to smoke. I got to have a drink with Troy. That game's on. I didn't know that game was on. I can't leave now. I got to have another. a bad test day tomorrow would be a better test day. And if I did the test the next day, the same thing would happen. Because as the allergic reaction to alcohol kicks in and the phenomenon of craving starts to manifest itself in me, it uses my own mind against me. And I don't think I'm driven by a craving. It looks to me like I just changed my mind. It looks to me like I woke up to new and brighter information. And that's always been true for me. I have never not had that reaction from alcohol. I am an alcoholic. And the problem with alcoholism is, and this almost killed me, if that was all there was, then in the early 1970s, you would have educated me, you would have showed me the Father Martin movie, you would have had the doctor would have talked about the brain chemistry and the allergic reaction and the acetone and all that stuff, and I would have went, okay, I get it. And I did. After not the first couple treatment centers, I was in 11 of them, but after about 5, because I don't want to be an alcoholic, it took me about 5 or 6 treatment centers, 5 or 6, burning my life to the ground pathetically before I finally, as Dr. Bear said, knew that I must never drink. And that's a trap. That's a bad trap, because some of you have experienced this where you know if you keep drinking it's going to kill you, but at times it feels like if I don't drink I'm going to die because of the way my emotions are and the way my mind's on me. And that's the problem with chronic alcoholism as opposed to a drug and alcohol problem. My problem, it's not just that I have this abnormal reaction to alcohol, is I have an abnormal reaction to abstinence. And it's abstinence that kills me. I've had about 20 friends, dear friends over the years that absolutely knew they must not and cannot drink it. They've used it up, it's no good. They can't even get relief out of it anymore. And yet they refuse to buy the whole package here. And so at many, many years, double-digit sobriety, they killed themselves. They took their own lives. Because alcoholism kills alcoholics. And it doesn't care if you're sober, and it doesn't care. It will back you into a corner, as it did me in 1978, where it looks like that's the only possible relief is suicide. Because the alcohol and the drugs don't work. Changing towns don't work. A new girlfriend don't work. Nothing. You've done it all. No human power, and you get it. And you can't stand it anymore, and suicide can start looking like a good deal. I've had friends that 43 and a half years sober, a woman killed herself. She was a tremendous member of Alcoholics Anonymous in the 1970s and early 80s, but she stopped doing it. She became that selfish person again who only does what she wants to do. And I think that's what almost killed me. That's what prevented me from ever getting better, was this ego and this how it manifests itself in this selfishness. You know, I fit the old adage, you can always tell an alcoholic, you just can't tell him much, right? I'm the guy you can't help. I'm the guy who's so obsessed with what you think about me that I will talk and act like I'm really here and I really want this, and I'll do anything you want me to do till you turn your back. And then you know what selfish people do? They only do the things they feel like doing, because that's what selfish people are about. I don't want to I'll do the stuff in AA that looks like fun. I'll go to the dances. I'll go out to coffee. I'll go to the potlucks. Make amends. Pay the money back? You've got to be kidding me. I never owed anybody that needed the money more than I did. Help other alcoholics, do 12-step work. For God's sakes, I'm the guy here who needs the most help. Because that's what selfish people do. And I had no respect for Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd come to AA out of a treatment center in the bus, sit in the back of the room, make a lot of noise, cross-talk. We didn't have phones. If I'd had a phone, I'd have been on it the whole meeting. I know it. You know what I did do, though? I'd read magazines in the meeting. That's a big FU to the people in AA, isn't it? Right? It's like I'm more important than you, right? That's what I was doing, really, because that was the position I was in. Selfish, childish, and self-centered. I had no respect for AA, of course not, because I don't have any respect for myself. Look at my life the last 3 years. It was not the life of someone who had any self-respect. It was the life of someone who hated themselves so deeply that unconsciously they're trying to kill themselves. And so if you can't respect Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll never learn to respect yourself. Isn't that funny? Everything comes backwards here. I thought I'm going to feel grateful first, and I'm going to feel respectful. I'm going to feel like doing all this stuff in AA before I do it. And AA is the opposite. Thank God in 1978, after a failed suicide attempt, I'd been relapsing for 7 years. Most horrible years in my life. And a lot of those years I understood that I must not drink. And many, many times I had sworn to myself and meant it. Sometimes sobbing uncontrollably that I'll never touch that stuff again. And I always went back to it again. And in those years I watched the progression of the disease. It just takes everything from you. It takes your self-respect. It takes your family. It takes your career. It takes everything. And then when there's nothing left, it takes the worst thing it takes. The worst thing. When you get to a place where your life is so pathetic and you're so full of a depressive self-loathing that for God's sakes I need the relief more than I've ever needed it. And when you need it the most, it pulls the plug. In the last couple years of my drinking, I drank in depression. I got sober in depression. I drank in horrible feelings of separation and loneliness. And when I get sober, I felt the same way. I don't fit anywhere. I got a mind that just won't get off of me. It just gets on me. I just starts talking to me. You know, just sit in meetings and the council wants me to get a sponsor. Yeah, I would, but Bill Wilson's dead and everybody else is stupid. And, you know, it says things to you. You know, they said to stay away from the new girl. That's because they're old and they haven't been laid in years. You know, it says stuff. It says stuff to you. You know, my head. Do you ever notice the voice in your head is more reasonable than the voice of a sponsor? You know? Of course it is if you're selfish and you're self-seeking and you're self-serving. Of course it is. But this is the voice of the enemy. When they, if you could read Hebrew, and I think a lot of what we have in our culture today comes from that. If you could read Genesis in the original Hebrew, and you got to the part where they introduced the serpent in the Garden of Eden, you know the actual word they used in Hebrew it would not translate into the English as the word for serpent. It was the word the Hebrews used to describe the sound the serpent made. It's the hiss. It just talks to you. You don't want to pay all your taxes, Bob. The government does stupid things with your money. You don't have to tell your sponsor everything. I mean, for God's sakes, you wouldn't understand some of this important stuff. It's that voice. It's the voice of the snake. It's the voice of the ego. It's the voice of self. And I'm in bondage. Every time I quit drinking, drinking at one time relieved me of the bondage of self. And then when it turned on me, I was depressed and full of me and horrible when I was drunk. I remember there was a time where I'd hurt a lot of people. I never meant to hurt anybody, but I hurt a lot of people. I gutted my mother and father emotionally over and over and over again until they would have nothing to do with me. And there was a time when alcohol still worked somewhat, and I could get drunk and have that, who cares? Just start having a party. Didn't bother me. Who cares? Just shrug it off. At the end of my drinking, I'd get about half drunk and I'd start crying because I can't stop thinking about what I did to my mother and father. I can't even drink away when I need. By this time, the remorse and the shame is piled up. It's overwhelming, and when I need the effect of the alcohol the most, I can't even get it. And the last couple of years were horrible. And I think for a lot of us, Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't become viable as long as there's still fun in drinking. You know, why would I get sober if there's still a party? My problem is I'm delusional. I've been chasing the ghosts of parties past now for about 3 years, and I can't catch them. Right? I'm beating a dead horse, and I don't understand what's happening to me. And when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous after this failed suicide attempt, and I didn't understand until years later when I look back, and I'd started reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that what I had experienced on that bridge when I failed to be able to kill myself, and I just started sobbing uncontrollably. I never felt like a greater failure than I did on that bridge, because I can't even kill myself. And the book refers to that as pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. There's a part in the book that describes where I was at. It says, you'll get to a place before you ever believe in God or AA or a sponsor or anything, you will believe in the hopelessness and futility of your life as you've been living it. Man, I believe that. When drinking is terrible and not drinking is terrible, and you don't even have the stones to kill yourself, you know hopelessness and you know some futility. And I was at that place, and I ended up through a bizarre series of circumstances, running from the law, trying to get to California, made it to Las Vegas. I was in a detox there, and I met a man who was almost 15 years sober, and he brought meetings in there with a bunch of his sponsees twice a week. He was a past delegate. He was involved in everything in Alcoholics Anonymous. He was a doer. He was a 5%er. He was a guy that had overcame his own selfishness by action. And he knew that there was freedom in that. And he knew that even the depressive person that I was, that there was freedom in that. And so he started to encourage me from day one. He would say things to me. I remember, and I'd listen. I'd listen to how he talked to other people. And I'd listen to what other people, the old-timers, would say to other people in AA. I heard this one guy one time. He was telling one of the old-timers how grateful he was. And the old-timer just called him out, says, "You're just full of crap. You're not grateful, you're selfish. You just make a little mental list of all your accomplishments in sobriety, as if that means something, but you don't do anything for anybody except you." He said, and the guy called him a taker. He said, "You're a taker." We have enough takers. You want to be grateful? Act like it. I remember that. I'll never forget that he was implying that gratitude was an action. And everything we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is action. I didn't believe in God, and my first sponsor, he told me he wanted me to get down on my knees and ask whatever's running the universe for help. And I told him, I said, I was an atheist when I got here. I said, I don't believe in God. And he said, I didn't ask you to believe in God, I asked you to pray. And I said, well, if I pray and I don't believe in God, I'd be a hypocrite. He said, oh, you've been a hypocrite all your life. What's the difference? Just do it. And I started taking these actions. I started going on 12-step calls. I started making amends. I turned myself into the courts and offered to do the 2 years. I mean, that was a turn. The book says we stood at the turning point. That was a turning point. It was the first time in my life that I ever that I ever was willing to set myself aside enough in the fears and follow your direction. And I didn't know that that's what surrendered people do. You see it in the movies all the time. When someone surrenders in a war movie, what do? They stop defending themselves. They lay down their guns, their knives, their hand grenades. They walk away from their Jeep or their tank, and they sit down and they wait for somebody to tell them what to do, and they just do it. And that's what happened to me in 1978 after that failed suicide attempt. I made this agreement with my sponsor that if he would sponsor me, I'd do anything he asked me to do. And I kind of waited for him to give me some bum dope so I could go around AA and tell everybody how horrible he was. He never gave me directions that didn't increase the value of my life, either spiritually, mentally, emotionally, or materially. I found that I could trust these people. But it started, and he wanted me just to say things to me. Because I came in and I was out of so many treatment centers. They teach you in treatment to say I'm an alcoholic and an addict, or I'm an addict and an alcoholic. He said, you're not two things. What are you? What are you? You're an Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're not an alcoholic, there's other programs. But are you an alcoholic? He helped me find my alcoholism. We had a lot of conversations about my drinking. And he said, you're an alcoholic here. You don't have to be anything else. He wanted me to dress appropriately in a meeting, which was more than cutoffs with private parts hanging out and things like that. And he wanted me to dress appropriately in a meeting. He said, you want my language to be, he said, don't be so selfish. You don't know who's in the meeting. What if some minister's in the meeting who has the potential to refer people to AA, and you do something disrespectful in the meeting, and he'll walk out of that meeting saying to himself, I'll never send anybody to AA. And you're the guy that made that happen. And then people would ask me questions. You want to be that guy? No, I don't. And I started to fall in love with Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started to do that because I started to serve AA. I went on a lot of 12-step calls. I was an intergroup rep. I was 9 years in general service. I've done H&I. I've done 2 to 3 H&I meetings a week for over 40 years. And I'll tell you a funny thing. This is unavoidable. You cannot help but fall in love with something that you serve. Some of you know that from your children. You can't help but fall in love with something you serve. And you can't help but stay in love with something that you serve. Because what is love except the willingness to set myself aside and make other people more important than me? It's the essence of our first tradition, that I'm supposed to put everybody ahead of me. And Alcoholics Anonymous, if you're new, it's a different place. This is not like church. This is not like Amway. This is not like Astor. I mean, it's different. It's very different. It's the only place I've ever been to where you come in a big shot and work your way up to servant, if you're lucky. Even our spiritual approach is different. In the 11th step, it holds our whole spiritual approach. That we pray only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry it out. I'll tell you something. Contained in the only is a deep humility, because it's evidentiary that we know something that a lot of religions and a lot of spiritual people don't know. We know we don't know. So I don't ask God for particulars. That's why there's prayers in AA like the Serenity Prayer. But the Serenity Prayer, it's you're giving God direction. You're telling him what to do, right? You're saying, God, write this down. Grant me, write this down, serenity, to accept the things I cannot change. Courage, I need some courage. Write that down. Courage. You're telling God you're telling him what to do. And the only prayer that seems to be in line with our 11th step totally is one of the pre-Christian versions of what now is in the last 2 centuries has been referred to as the Lord's Prayer. But you could Google Islam and the Lord's Prayer, or Google Judaism and the Lord's Prayer, and you'll find out that it's existed in all these cultures, and it's existed before Christianity. And one of the pre-Christian versions of the Lord's Prayer, it aligns itself perfectly with our 11th step, because in the second part of the step is not, you're not giving God orders. You're not saying, give me this day our daily bread. In the original version, it's you give us this day our daily bread, don't you? You forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And you lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. You're not telling God what to do. You're acknowledging the gift that has already been given. And my grand sponsor was a guy named Chuck Chamberlain, and he used to talk about that a lot. He said, it's stupid to ask God for something He's already given it to you. You just don't know it. You just don't know it. Wake up to the gift that has been given to you in your creation. Chamberlain was he was such a brilliant guy. I remember him saying, there was one problem that contained all problems, and that was conscious and unconscious separation. And man, I didn't understand it intellectually, but I understood it emotionally, because every time I quit drinking, I end up in AA with a feeling like it's all of you and then there's me. I have had the pangs of anxious apartness that Bill Wilson talks about. I know what it feels like to be sober and want to fit and not be able to fit, and I don't know how to fit. So you know what I do? I make it your fault. You're cliquey, aren't you? Right? You're stupid. Oh, you're that kind of person. I make it my internal feelings of separation. I make it your fault, because the ego has to justify its position. And at the root of this separation, our book says, is selfishness and self-centeredness. And I think that really is the problem I faced all my life. In this loneliness that is untreated alcoholism, I got too much of me between me and you. I got too much of me between me and God, and I got too much of me between me and life. That's why it feels at times when I'm sober and I haven't worked the steps and I don't have a sponsor and I'm all me, it feels at times like I'm all alone. I'm separate from everything. It feels like I'm losing my mind here in this loneliness. When I stood on a bridge in 1978 and tried to take my own life, if you would have come along and said to me, Bob, is this alcoholism? Somebody would have come along and said, is it alcoholism? I think I'd have said, no, it's not. I'm dying of loneliness here, and I don't understand what's wrong with me. But something's happened that's horrible. I don't fit anywhere when I'm drinking anymore, and I used to. And I don't fit anywhere when I'm sober, and I don't belong anywhere. And I'm aimless. And it felt like I was dying of loneliness. And I was. I was dying of a disease called alcoholism that doesn't look like alcoholism at first. Looks like depression, looks like anxiety, looks like panic disorder, looks like social anxiety disorder. It looks like I tell you, they've sit in AA meetings and they listen to us talk, and then they go to labs and try to make pills for everything we talk about. I'm telling you, they do. That's what read some of the old R&D from Eli Lilly. You'd think they were sitting in an AA meeting. We need something for restless, irritable, and discontent. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I started to serve AA. When I started to serve AA and I started to sponsor people, it was as if, unbeknownst to me, a light was coming on inside of me that was always there. I had just covered it up so much with self. And I was dying. And I felt like my spirit was dead. It wasn't dead. It was just suffocated. And I started to sponsor people, and I started to finish the steps and make the amends and all the stuff we do here. I was taught in general service the importance of the traditions. And then I later learned that they're the highest set of spiritual principles here. If I could practice those as a way of life, I got the best shot I ever would have for self-reduction and connectedness. And I started trying to put all these things in my life. And in time, it's slow, but I started to get better, and I started to fall in love with my life, and I started to trust God. Somebody asked me to tell this story, but I had a hard time trusting God. And when you're full of fear and you don't know it, I'm so full of fear that fear seems normal to me, right? I think it's normal just to wake up afraid and worry all day long. I think it's normal to be so worried about stuff that I walk around and drive around having conversations in my head with people that aren't around just in case I ever run into them because I'm so full of fear, right? Because and it's not that I don't have faith, but faith isn't enough here. In the books it says the only thing we have to suggest is to trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. And I was a couple years sober, and I was at a retreat, and I was having a lot of bouts of anxiety because I'm a worrier. I'm a funny guy. I can sit for 15, 20 minutes, and I have this tendency to check my future. I don't know if anybody else is obsessed with their future as I am, but I've never looked at my future and where it looked joyous. I see problems in my future. And sometimes I'm grateful that I'm looking at them because they could have got by me. And I'm looking at I'm seeing all these problems, and I'm overwhelmed with this anxiety and all this stuff. And I'm telling this guy about this who's an old timer. And he said, well, do you pray? And I said, oh yeah, I pray every morning. He said, you have faith? I said, yeah, I do. I have more faith than I've ever imagined possible. I know God's kept me sober all this time. And I was sober a couple years. He said, but do you trust God? And I guess I looked at him like, what do you mean? He said, let me tell you the difference. And why faith, he said, faith and prayer aren't enough for us. There's guys that pray and have tremendous faith and drink themselves to death. And I'll tell you, I saw that up close and personal as some members of clergy that I tried to work with drank themselves to death who had more faith than I'd ever have. He said, what we must have is trust. And he said, if you went to a circus and you sat in the audience and you watched a tight wire act, and you watch this guy come out to the edge of the wire and he's pushing a wheelbarrow. He's on the platform with this wheelbarrow. You could have all the faith in the world. He's a professional. I bet you he's walked across that tight wire, pushing that wheelbarrow 1,000 times. Absolute faith he can do it. Then he said to me, but if you had trust, you'd sit in the wheelbarrow and let him reel you across. When he said that, I went, oh, no. Oh, no. Because I know what he means. He wants me to really have that kind of position with God. And I'm not against it. I mean, I intellectually think it's a great idea. I like reading about getting in the wheelbarrow. I like going out to coffee with people, discussing the intricacies of getting in the wheelbarrow. I like philosophizing about how wonderful it would be to get in the wheelbarrow. I just ain't getting in the damn wheelbarrow. Because I believe, more than I trust God, I believe that if I ever did become that vulnerable, with no defenses and no self-defense at all, I'd get about halfway out that wire and I'd hear God say, oh, you're Bob, aren't you? And my life would flash, every terrible, slimy thing I ever did would flash before my eyes, and I would convinced he'll over the side. So what happens to some of us is we get backed into a corner. Wouldn't it be nice if there was only one surrender here? But there's a bunch. And sometimes in sobriety, with many years of sobriety, we're crushed by these self-imposed crises we cannot postpone or evade. I did it, made decisions based on self, which looked like a good idea when I was doing it. And now it's coming at me, and I don't know what the hell to do. And you guys keep saying that God will take care of me. I got nothing. I just hope you're right. I hope you're right, because I've got nothing here. And what happens time and time again, I come out the other side of the wire and I know that I've been protected. And the problem corrects itself. And I didn't have to do anything. I had to go make an amends. So I'd do some little things like that. And I had a pilot friend of mine. I'm going to tell you this little story and I'll shut up. What if all your worry and all the problems in your life have never existed? What if they were just manufactured by an ego that has to have problems, or else it's terrified it will recede into obscurity if it doesn't have something to play God about? What if they never existed? And if they did come to fruition, it's because you got in there and monkeyed with them. And as the psychiatrists talk about, these self-fulfilling prophecies, you made it come true. What if they never existed? What if we never left the Garden of Eden? We just don't know it. What if what Chuck Chamberlain said is true? That I don't have to worry about nothing. God's got me. All I got to do is spend the rest of my life enjoying the gifts and helping his kids. What if there really isn't any problems? What if what Dr. Paul would talk about all the time, I used to hear him before he passed away, he'd say he would be amazed how his problems would die of neglect as he was out helping somebody. What if your very life was self-correcting? And I had this pilot friend, and he told me a story about flying in this little plane, and he hit what I think is called a wind shear. I'm not a pilot. And in this plane, it got thrown into a tailspin, and he said it was frightening. He said, you think you're going to die, you're spinning out of control. He said, every instinct in you is to pull back. And he said he'd been taught that if he pulls back, he will crash and die for sure. That what he must do with this particular plane is something that went against every emotion he had. He had to push the stick forward and then let it go, and it bounces back and the plane corrects itself. What if my life is like that? What if it was made by my Creator like that, and the only time it doesn't correct itself is when I get in the way? What if all these years of worrying were for nothing except to create an ulcer? What if I never have left the Garden of Eden and I just didn't wake up to it? And I'll tell you, I think that's true. My life is self-correcting. The hardest thing I ever have to do is to take my hands off the seeming problems and watch them resolve themselves, and they always do, in spite of me. My life corrects itself, because that's the gift, as Chamberlain said, that was made in the foundation of our creation. If you're new, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope you're beaten and broken enough to set your selfishness aside and come here and join us. You can come here and remain a taker, but I'm telling you, you'll get sicker and sicker. It's not until you become a respectful giver who honors Alcoholics Anonymous that your spirit will change and your life will follow. Thanks for listening.